The rain kept its rhythm against the windshield, a steady tapping like fingers on a kitchen table, gentle until the wind pressed harder and the glass thrummed. Mark sat in the idling truck and watched the grocery store doors breathe open and shut, a slow pulse in the storm. Leo, his service dog, lay curled on the seat but not asleep, chest rising in calm waves, ears angling to each sound like they had a mind of their own. They had come out for milk, nothing more, yet the world had a way of changing plans when the sky turned this gray. Leo lifted his head and placed a warm paw on Mark's leg. Not a nudge, not a statement. Mark followed his gaze and saw a woman step out of the automatic doors, hugging a crumpled cardboard box, with a boy behind her carrying another that listed to one side, rain working its way through the seams. The box gave suddenly, and a tangle of clothes slid into a puddle, a framed photo face down in the water. The woman didn't cry out. She only reached with both hands like she had done this before, like she knew how to keep breathing even as the water kept falling. Mark killed the engine and opened his door. The downpour found his collar and slid down his spine, a cold reminder of other nights. Leo was already out, slipping past him, that soft golden shape steady at the boy's side, nose, tail low. The woman looked up, weary eyes under wet hair, but the dog's intention held. Mark crouched and lifted the frame first, wiped the glass with his sleeve, and met the boy's gaze. "You're all right," he said without saying it, because some words move better without sound. The woman said her name was Sarah and the boy was David, and they were sorry for the mess, which struck Mark as a thing people say when they are too used to being in the way. He shook his head and picked up the clothes, squeezing water back to the ground. Leo gave the frame a quick sniff, then fixed on Sarah as if waiting for a code only she could speak. Her mouth tightened. "This is all they let us take," she said, voice soft and holding, "and we needed to get away from the curb before the truck came again." Mark recognized the look in her eyes. It lived in quiet corners of waiting rooms and in the backs of buses at night, a mix of resolve and exhaustion. He nodded toward the truck. "Come out of the rain," he said in that plain way learned from early mornings and long roads. Sarah hesitated, eyes dropping to Leo's patch, her fingers brushing the edge of the boy's sleeve as if counting the threads between them. Leo held her gaze and gave a small huff, not impatient, just now. She climbed in with the boy and the damp boxes. Mark took the wheel and felt the dog settle with his weight pressed against the bench, a silent anchor. They drove with the defroster humming and the wipers lifting sheets of water off the glass. The store's neon fell away, and they were in the small town streets where the houses sat quiet under sagging trees, their porches holding puddles like cupped hands. Sarah spoke in pieces, like stones laid one by one so a person could cross a stream. The landlord had pinned a notice 2 weeks ago. She had made calls, stretched money, worked hours at the community center in the afternoons and evenings at a diner until her feet ached. This morning the movers arrived before she believed they would, and neighbors had watched from behind curtains, not in malice, only unsure if stepping out would help or embarrass. She had tried to hold on to her husband's things most of all, but grief has a way of making every object heavy, and the rain made everything heavier. Mark listened, hands loose on the wheel. He did not offer platitudes, because there are many words and not all of them are useful. Leo, who rarely intruded, placed his muzzle on the boy's knee and breathed in slow, an old practiced rhythm that says slow down to a rattled heart. The boy's shoulders eased a fraction. Mark felt it, the way storms within people sometimes change because a dog asked them to. They reached Mark's cabin near the tree line, a narrow road where the puddles joined to make a low stream, and the air smelled like wet pine. Inside was the hum of a baseboard heater and the faint scent of coffee that never quite leaves a home. Mark set towels on the chair backs, left a basket by the door, handed the boy a pair of thick socks. Leo shook, a burst of water that hit the mat and walls, then stood, eyes on Sarah, forward, tail still. He was not restless. He was waiting. Sarah held her mug with both hands and said, "There was one more thing," and the words came out stiff like a zipper that needed coaxing. Her husband had passed 3 years ago, a quiet illness that took him faster than anyone had promised or predicted. He had served before she met him. He kept a wooden chest, heavy as a footlocker, that he would rest his hand on when he could not sleep and say not yet, and she learned to leave it alone. The landlord had promised to keep it in the basement when she fell behind because he knew it mattered. This morning she saw it on the curb with a tag that said broken hinge. She could not carry it and could not watch, so she had walked away before the trash truck turned the corner. Leo stood and moved to the door, then to her knee, then to the door again. It was not begging. It was direction. Mark put on his coat. The storm had eased into a steady fall that made the gravel look like polished river stones. Sarah bit her lip but followed. The boy held Leo's harness, and the dog's pace slowed to match him step for step, which is a thing trained dogs do, and also a thing friends do. They found the house as the porch light flickered and went out as if even the bulbs were tired. The chest was there by the cans, water darkening its wood to a deep bruise. Mark reached for it and Leo released a low sound, not warning of danger, warning of someone present. The landlord, Mr. Jensen, stepped from the side yard with another box in his arms. He looked older without a hat, rain marking the dips in his face, jaw set but not hard. Sarah stood up straight in the rain and asked for the chest. "Please." The man's mouth opened and closed like he was trying to catch breath. He said something about rules and storage and how life had been hard on his side too. Then he looked at Leo, who did not back down and did not lean in, but held the ground between them with the weight of purpose. Jensen sighed the way a person does who has been stubborn too long. He put the box down and said take it and did not slam the door when he went inside. Mark and Sarah lifted the chest together, the wood pulling at their hands with weight and memory. Leo jumped into the truck and placed a paw on the lid and refused to move it even when the truck took the turn and the road jostled. Sometimes an animal understands ceremony better than people. Back at the cabin, they set the chest on a woven rug that had seen years of boots and bare feet. The lock was plain brass, cold to the touch. Sarah traced it with a pat of her finger and said no key in a voice so small that the room seemed to tilt toward her. Mark ran thumbs along the seams. Wood swells and loosens when it takes on water, and sometimes it wants to tell you a secret. Leo circled once, twice, then pressed his paw to a lower corner, not the lock, the edge. Mark slid a folding knife and levered lightly, wood giving with a soft complaint. A thin compartment breathed open, and a bundle wrapped in plastic blinked up at them. Sarah did not move at first. Then she took the bundle and peeled the plastic back. A letter folded with the care of a man who likes tools in order. Her name on the front in a hand that knew how to hold a pencil steady, even when life did not hold steady. She unfolded it. A deed slipped out to a parcel of land near the creek past the old mill road. Recorded, paid, aside. In the letter, her husband said he had learned how quickly ground can shift under a man's feet, and how a family needs a place where the floor does not. He wrote of wanting her safe. He wrote of the boy's laughter as a sound he planned for, furniture he could build without nails. He wrote of rain as a test that houses must pass. Sarah pressed the paper to her chest and did not cry, but her shoulders trembled in a way that made Mark look to the stove, so she could have her moment. Leo returned to the boy and lay with his back against the child's legs, a wall of warmth holding in the center. When the quiet settled, Sarah looked up and said the county office. "We need to go," and Mark nodded. The world was still wet when they stepped out, but it felt different, like the rain was rinsing instead of washing away. The clerk at the county office had hair pinned tight and glasses that slid when she smiled. She took the papers and frowned while her computer thought. She went to a back room and came out with a book as thick as a doorstop, pages edged with years. The deed was valid, the taxes to that point small, because the land had sat without structures. The name still hers. The clerk said it was not every day she got to tell someone good news, and she did it gently, like handing a cup of hot tea to cold hands. On the way out, worry slid back into Sarah's voice like a measured tide. Land is not walls. Land is not heat. Mark agreed. But a place to build is a beginning a person can touch. He told her the people at the community center knew her by name, not as a file, and he would make calls. She said they had an event on Thursdays where the doors stayed open late and the lights in the gym made everything feel possible for a few hours. He said Thursday was tomorrow. Leo, perhaps hearing the word place, wagged his tail exactly twice and stopped, which was usually a sign that something had lined up right. The land sat past a bend in the road where maples flared red in the fall and the creek talked to the stones, even when it had nothing new to say. There was a small cabin there, tired around the edges, porch sagging like a patient back, but straight in the bones. A carpenter named David Morales, who wore an old cap and moved with the caution of someone who knows stairs can be tricky on some mornings, looked long at the frame and nodded. He said this could be saved. He said it like a person might say a person could be saved and mean both things. Word moved among neighbors in the way news moves when it carries work worth doing. A man who fixed roofs came by with a truck bed full of shingles he had left over from a job that paid fair. A retired teacher brought paint rollers and a cooler of sandwiches, her wrists wrapped to keep the joints from catching. A young mom dropped off a bag of hand-me-down coats and left before anyone could thank her because she was shy about being seen. A pastor lent a trailer. A woman from the diner brought soup that tasted like it had been standing on stoves since the recipe was born. Jensen pulled up in his own truck and stood for a long time without stepping out. When he did, he held out a bundle of Ridge Vent and said he had overbought, and if they did not want it he could take it back, which was a way to offer help without making it look like a favor. Sarah took the bundle and said, "Thank you plain." He nodded and looked past her and said, "Your husband once helped me put my fence back on its posts during a storm for no pay, and I should have remembered that faster." She said storms make fools of us all sometimes, and the man held his breath and let it out and went to work. Work looks like many things when it is done with love. It looks like ladders scraping against new gutters, and nail guns coughing in the morning mist, and paint cans lined like soldiers at attention. It looks like David and Leo walking the property line together, the boy pointing to a tree where he wanted to hang a swing someday, Leo sitting under it, helted, as if measuring the angle. Mark pulled out rotten joists and set new ones, hands, eyes on level lines, listening when Sarah spoke of where she wanted the light to fall in the kitchen in winter. At midday, the field became a picnic without anyone planning it. People sat on tailgates and steps and milk crates and told stories not to top each other, but to lay their lives side by side. The carpenters swapped tips about joints, and the old vets argued kindly about the best way to cut a miter in damp weather. Someone remembered Sarah's husband and the way he could make a cabinet door swing true. A teenager from down the road patched a bicycle tire for the boy like a magician going for applause and tried to hide his grin when the air held. Leo wandered through it all like a thread tying quilt pieces together, stopping where hands were shaking and standing still until they steadied. In the evening, Sarah painted the shutters a blue that felt like air after rain, and David planted small tomatoes in a strip of turned soil that glowed black. Mark hauled a rocking chair from his truck and set it on the porch and sanded the arms until a palm would find them easy. When paperwork needed signing, a lawyer who had a father on the wall of the town's memorial offered his time for nothing but a handshake. He explained the forms without drowning them in words. He made sure the deed sat in Sarah's name like a weight on the right side of a scale. Opening day was not a ribbon cutting. It was a crowd that did not need a microphone to hear. They came with casseroles and stories and sat in the grass as if they had been assigned seats by the sun. The house stood square and modest, paint smiling, porch steps inviting knees. Sarah placed her husband's photo on the mantel and the letter beneath it, and stood with her hands open, not clutched, open. She said her husband always believed a promise lives longer when many hands hold it, and now she could see he had been right. Mark did not stand near the front. He leaned against a porch post and let his back feel the grain. Leo sat pressed to his boot and watched the people and breathed. There was a moment when the chatter quieted without anyone calling for it, and the hush felt like a prayer, not of words, of present. A breeze moved across the yard and lifted the hair on David's head and set the leaves to their small applause. Days became weeks and the house learned its sounds. The creak of the third stair, the hum of the fridge at night, the rustle of curtains in a morning draft. Veterans found their way there on Tuesdays for coffee that somehow stretched into lunch. A widow brought a photo album and left with half the room, claiming each picture as theirs to remember. A teenager who had been skipping school sat at the table for an hour and fixed a broken lamp, and then came back with a friend because fixing felt good in the hands. The community center sent over flyers for food drives, and Sarah set a basket by the door that never stayed empty for long. Leo had his own work in this new place. He learned which chair groaned under a big man's weight and laid beside it so the man would sit steady. He learned when a laugh ran sharp from nerves and leaned until it softened. He learned the sound of David's foot on the porch and beat it with his own tail thump for thump. Mark watched it and felt the part of him that had stayed braced for years relax like a tight knot finally warmed loose. He took long walks along the creek with Leo off leash, the dog drifting ahead and back, checking, leading, checking, a dance practiced without choreography. A service at the town green in late summer drew the same faces and new ones. Flags lifted to a breeze that smelled faintly of cut grass and hot pavement. Names read into air that held them gently. Sarah stood near the end of the line, her hand on David's shoulder, his hand tucked into the crook of her arm. When her husband's name came, she closed her eyes and nodded once. Private, yes. Mark felt something move in his chest. Not pain, not joy, the honest weight of memory, the recognition that survival is a skill and living is an art, and both take time. When the reading ended, children ran because they could and laughter began because relief is a cousin of grief, and they visit together. Leo took off with David across the grass and then turned and came back to brush against a man whose eyes were glassy, and stayed until the man reached down and scratched his head and those eyes cleared. Mark touched the brim of his cap to no one in particular and to everyone at once. That night the stars were crisp like a clean shirt. Mark sat on his porch and listened to the creek and to the sound of a night bird asking its small questions. He told Leo he had been wrong about endings, that they are seldom endings, more often openings shaped like closures. He said he had thought duty ended when the uniform hung in the closet. Now he knew it moved into other clothes. He said the dog already knew these things and had been kind enough to let him catch up. Leo looked at him with that gaze that hears the words behind the words and exhaled, a long quiet sound that felt like agreement. For those who find a soft seat at this part of the story, say where you are listening from. A kitchen in Ohio, a porch in Texas, a bus in the rain, a hospital room at midnight. Say it so someone else can hear and remember they are not the only one awake. Share the story of your loyal companion if you have one, whether for a memory, and let the telling be a small lantern on your own path. Time moved forward. Sarah's tomatoes ripened, and she gave a bag to Jensen with a smile that made his face rearrange itself into something lighter. The carpenter with the old cap came by less often because his knees ached, but when he did, he sat in the rocking chair and let it hold him. The retired teacher brought a stack of books to start a shelf and wrote names on the inside covers so the books could travel and find their way back. The lawyer popped in to ask if the papers still made sense, and if not, he would change the sentence that tangled them. The house settled into the land, and the land accepted it. Mark drove the long road to town and back some mornings just to feel the truck roll and the day open. He stopped at the community center and stacked chairs and poured coffee and kept his hands busy with small necessary tasks. He answered quiet questions from men who were learning to speak again. He learned how to hear without digging and how to show up without making a speech. He came to believe that a man can serve without a formation if he understands how to stand. If this story rests right in your chest, help it find another chest that needs it. Support this mission by subscribing so people who need a hand can see one offered. There is a next story already queued on your screen, not because one story is not enough, but because kindness is a habit and habits are built in repetition. The rain came again weeks later, but it sounded different on Leo's coat and on the new porch roof. Mark parked at the foot of the hill and walked up with a sack of apples from a roadside stand. Sarah waved from the door and David tugged Leo's ear, and the dog tolerated it with a patience reserved for those he loves. The photograph on the mantel watched over a room full of used furniture that looked better used than new. The letter sat framed beneath, not as an artifact of sorrow, but as a blueprint for love turned into lumber and paint and meals and laughter. Mark stood in the doorway and let the warmth from inside reach him. He gave the apples to Sarah and took nothing in return except the sight of a house fulfilling its purpose. He lifted 2 fingers to a cap again, a small salute to the man in the photograph, to the people on the porch, to the dog at his side, to the boy at the edge of a new map, to the rain still honest in its falling, to the ground that held. We honor every veteran and every family who keeps the light. Stay with us now if you can. The next story is waiting just ahead. Another road where a loyal dog will listen. Another porch where a soldier will sit. Another promise kept in the quiet work of everyday hands.